The sound of the door slamming shut echoed through the small, humble home, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than ever before. It wasn't just the noise that stunned the old man standing there, his hands trembling slightly as he held the door frame. It was the words that had been spoken just moments ago, words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "You're nothing to me now. Leave." For years he had dedicated every ounce of his life, his strength, and his love to raise his son. Every sacrifice, every long night of hard work, every moment of hardship, he had endured with one thought in his mind: his son's future. He dreamed of a day when his boy would stand tall, proud, and successful, with a life that he could never have imagined for himself. And yet, here he was, at the mercy of the very person he had raised, tossed aside like an old rag. This story isn't just about an old man and his son. It's about love, betrayal, and the unthinkable twists that life can throw at you. It's about what happens when all the hopes you placed in someone are crushed in an instant, when everything you've worked for, all the sacrifices, seem to mean nothing at all. Meet Li Shen, an elderly man with weathered hands and a heart full of love for his son, Li Wei. Shen's life hadn't been easy. He was born into poverty, worked the hardest jobs, and barely scraped by. Yet when his son was born, it felt as though all the years of struggle had led to this moment. He wanted more for his son than he could ever give himself. He believed that by giving Wei the best education, the best opportunities, and the most love a father could provide, his son would grow up to be everything he had never been: successful, happy, and free from the burdens of the world that had weighed him down. From the moment Wei could walk, Shen made sure his son never felt the struggles he had faced. Every penny he earned went into Wei's education. Every moment he had was spent making sure his son would never go without. They lived in a cramped apartment, the walls barely holding together, but to Shen, it was worth it. Wei was thriving in school, excelling in ways Shen had only dreamed of for himself. He believed that one day, his son would repay all the sacrifices and the love he had given him. It was his hope, his dream, his reason for living. But as the years passed, Shen's health began to deteriorate. The long hours of hard labor, the lack of proper care, and the weight of his years finally caught up with him. However, Wei, now a young adult, was thriving. He had friends, a promising career, and a future that seemed limitless. Shen watched from the sidelines as his son grew further away from him, immersed in the life he had worked so hard to provide. Still, Shen didn't mind. He was proud of the man Wei was becoming. Then came the day that changed everything. It started as a simple conversation about finances. Shen, unable to keep up with his medical bills, asked Wei for help. It wasn't much, just a little support to help cover his costs. But what happened next was beyond Shen's imagination. Wei, the son he had given everything for, turned his back on him. With cold, distant words, Wei told his father that he was too old to be relying on him. "You should have planned better for your own future," Wei had said, his voice emotionless. The words felt like a slap across Shen's face. At first, Shen thought it was a misunderstanding, but soon it became clear that Wei's attitude had shifted. He no longer saw his father as a hero, but as a burden. Shen's heart broke, but he couldn't bring himself to say anything. He had always taught Wei to stand on his own 2 feet, to be independent, and maybe that had worked too well. Perhaps he had given his son everything without teaching him to value what mattered most, the bond they shared. Then, one fateful evening, the inevitable happened. Wei came home and told Shen he needed to leave. "You're a liability," he said, his words cutting deep. Shen was stunned. unable to speak. How could this be happening? Hadn't he given everything for this moment? Hadn't he sacrificed so much? Shen packed his things, the weight of betrayal heavier than his old bones could bear. He stood outside the apartment door, staring at the life he had built, now crumbling before his eyes. His son, the one person he had loved and cared for more than anything, had just kicked him out. The apartment that had once been their home now felt like a prison, and Shen was no longer welcome inside. As Shen wandered the streets, aimlessly, with nowhere to go, memories of better days haunted him. How did it come to this? Was his love for his son not enough? Had he made a mistake by giving so much of himself to Wei, leaving nothing for himself? The questions spun in his mind, unanswered and suffocating. But Shen wasn't one to give up. He had fought all his life, and he wasn't going to let this final betrayal break him. He didn't know what was next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let Wei forget him. Shen's story wasn't over. He still had something to prove, to both himself and his son. Would Wei realize the depth of his father's love? Could the bond between them be repaired? Or was it too late? And most importantly, would Shen find the strength to rebuild his life, even without the son he had sacrificed everything for? The next part of this story will reveal just how far Shen is willing to go to seek justice, forgiveness, and redemption. But one thing is clear: the road ahead will be filled with trials, challenges, and emotional reckonings that neither father nor son could ever have predicted. Stay tuned, because the journey has just begun. And it's not over yet. As the days passed, Shen found himself lost in a sea of uncertainty. He had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. His mind kept returning to that moment, the moment when Wei had kicked him out. It was almost as if he had been watching someone else's life unfold, as if this couldn't possibly be his reality. The world outside seemed so indifferent to his pain, as if the streets, the cold wind, and the indifferent faces of strangers were all conspiring to remind him that he was no longer needed, no longer relevant. But Shen wasn't one to simply lie down and accept defeat. He had worked his entire life, struggling through every hardship, just to ensure that Wei would have a better future. And now it felt like all of that had been thrown back in his face. The love, the sacrifice, the years of work, all discarded. In an instant, Shen knew he had to confront Wei, to find out what had gone so horribly wrong. But something stopped him every time he thought about it. What if he wasn't ready to hear the truth? What if the son he had raised, loved, and nurtured had truly become someone unrecognizable? Days turned into weeks. Shen tried to find work, though his age and declining health made it nearly impossible. He found himself wandering the streets, sitting on park benches, feeling more like a stranger in his own city than ever before. His thoughts constantly drifted back to Wei, to the boy he had seen grow into a young man with such promise, ambition, and dreams of success. Where had that boy gone? What had turned him into the cold, heartless person who had cast aside the man who had given everything to him? But then, as if the universe had thrown him a lifeline, Shen received a letter one morning. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar, though it had been years since he had seen it. It was from Wei. The letter was brief, but its contents sent a chill through Shen's spine. Wei had asked to meet. Shen's first instinct was to throw the letter away. What could Wei possibly want from him now? But there was something in the tone of the letter, something that made Shen hesitate. He had raised Wei to be a man of honor, to face his challenges with courage, and Shen believed that even now, his son deserved that chance to explain himself, to make things right. The meeting was set for a small cafe on the edge of town, a place where they had shared many meals together when Wei was younger. Shen arrived early. his hands shaking, as he gripped the worn-out letter in his pocket. The cafe was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered around, lost in their own worlds. Shen sat by the window, his eyes scanning the street nervously, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't help but wonder what Wei was going to say. Was this an apology? Or was it another cruel reminder that his sacrifices had meant nothing? Minutes passed, stretching into what felt like hours, before the door opened, and there stood Wei. Shen's breath caught in his throat as he looked at the man who had once been his whole world. Wei looked different. His once youthful face was harder. Now, his eyes distant, as if the light had gone out of them. He stepped inside, and for a moment, neither father nor son said a word. The tension between them was palpable, hanging in the air like a thick fog. Wei finally spoke, his voice strained. "I'm sorry, father." For everything. Shen felt his chest tighten. He had been expecting this moment for so long. But now that it was here, he wasn't sure how to respond. His heart wanted to forgive, but his mind couldn't forget the hurt, the betrayal, the years of sacrifice, of giving everything for Wei's future. Felt like they had been thrown away in an instant. Shen struggled to find his voice, unsure of how to address the son who had torn his world apart. "You kicked me out, Wei. After everything I did for you, after everything I gave." Shen's voice faltered, and he had to swallow hard to keep his emotions in check. "How could you do that to me?" Wei winced, the pain of his own actions clearly weighing on him. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way, but I felt trapped, father. You were always there, always asking for something, always needing me to fix things. I couldn't breathe. I wanted my own life, my own space. And when I found out you were struggling, I couldn't handle it. I've been so angry, so frustrated. I thought I was doing the right thing." Shen was taken aback. This wasn't the apology he had expected. It wasn't an acknowledgement of his sacrifices or the love he had given. It wasn't even a real recognition of the pain Wei had caused. Instead, it was a story of Wei's own struggles, his own feelings of being overwhelmed and trapped. Shen's heart sank. It was as if his years of effort had been reduced to nothing more than a burden to his son. For a long moment, the two sat in silence, the weight of their words hanging between them. Shen had always believed that love could heal anything, that forgiveness could mend even the deepest wounds. But now he wasn't sure anymore. Wei had taken everything from him, and yet here he was, asking for understanding. Shen couldn't help but wonder, was it too late for them? Was there any hope of salvaging their relationship? Just when Shen thought he might give in, just when he thought he might offer forgiveness despite the hurt, Wei dropped another bombshell. "Father, I've made a decision. I'm moving away. I'm leaving the city for good." The words hit Shen like a punch to the gut. It was as if everything he had fought for, everything he had hoped for, was slipping away, out of his reach. He had tried to rebuild his life, but now it felt as though his son was disappearing from his life completely. Shen didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond. The man sitting before him was no longer the boy he had raised. Wei stood up, his face set in determination. "I need to do this, father, for myself." As Wei turned and walked out of the cafe, Shen sat there, frozen in place, the weight of his son's decision sinking in. Was this the end of their story? Was there any way to repair the damage? Or was this a loss too great to overcome? Shen had given everything to raise Wei, but now he found himself standing alone once again, caught in the bitter aftermath of his son's departure. The silence that filled the cafe was deafening, and for the first time in years, Shen realized that the real battle was just beginning. The days after Wei's departure were a blur for Shen. The house felt emptier than ever, and each corner seemed to remind him of the life that had once been full of love and laughter. He found himself unable to sit still, wandering the quiet halls, replaying the moments from their past. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't make sense of what had happened. Had he failed as a father? Had Wei been right to walk away, to choose his own life over the one they had built together? Weeks passed, and Shen's health continued to decline. The pain in his joints worsened, and the weight of the years bore down on him. It became harder to get out of bed each morning, but there was something else that weighed on him even more than his body. The unanswered questions about his son. Why had Wei chosen to leave? Why had he turned his back on everything Shen had done for him? It was a late afternoon when Shen got the call. His hand shook as he picked up the phone, his heart racing. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the news it carried was anything but. "Mr. Shen," the voice asked, with a hint of hesitation. "This is Zhang from the hospital. We have a patient here, a Wei Shen. He's in critical condition. We need you to come down right away." Shen's heart dropped. He couldn't breathe. It was like the world had been thrown upside down. Wei, his son, who had just left him, was now in danger. Without a second thought, Shen grabbed his coat and hurried out of the house, his legs weak beneath him as he rushed toward the hospital. When he arrived, the scene was chaos. The hospital was buzzing with doctors and nurses, but Shen barely registered any of it. His mind was focused solely on his son. He was led into a sterile room, and there, lying unconscious on the bed, was Wei. His face was pale, his body battered, and there were wires and machines surrounding him. Shen's heart broke at the sight. The son he had once known, the son he had raised with so much love, was now lying here, fighting for his life. The doctor explained that Wei had been in a car accident. He had been driving alone, and the injuries were severe. They weren't sure if he would make it. Shen's chest tightened with grief, guilt, and confusion. He wanted to scream at the world, to demand answers, but instead, he just stood there, frozen, watching his son fight for survival. It wasn't until late that evening, when the doctors had done all they could, that Shen was finally allowed to sit beside Wei's bed. The room was quiet, the machines beeping softly in the background. For the first time in weeks, Shen felt a deep, aching sense of helplessness. His son was in pain, and there was nothing he could do to make it stop. He sat there for hours, the weight of everything pressing down on him. As night settled in, Wei's eyes fluttered open. His gaze was unfocused at first, but when he saw Shen sitting beside him, his expression softened, a faint recognition flashing in his eyes. "Father, I'm sorry," Wei whispered, his voice barely a breath. Shen's heart broke all over again. This was the moment he had waited for, the moment he had longed for. But it wasn't the apology he had expected. It wasn't the grand speech about regret or a tearful reunion. It was just a simple, quiet admission of what had been buried deep inside. "I never understood you, Father," Wei continued, his voice cracking. "I thought you held me back. I thought you were trying to control my life. But now, I see, everything you did, everything you gave, was for me. You loved me in a way I couldn't understand." Tears welled up in Shen's eyes, and he reached out, taking Wei's hand in his. In that moment, everything that had happened, the hurt, the betrayal, the confusion, seemed to melt away. It wasn't about who had been right or wrong anymore. It was about the love they had shared, the bond they had once had, and even though it had been tested, it was still there. "I'm sorry, Father. I wasn't ready for any of it," Wei said, his voice full of regret. "I thought I needed to run away to find myself. but I lost myself in the process. I never realized what you went through for me, what you gave up. I was too blind to see it." Shen squeezed his hand, trying to hold back his own tears. "It's not too late, Wei. We're still here. We can still figure this out." As Wei drifted back into unconsciousness, Shen stayed by his side, praying that his son would make it through. He had spent so many years trying to make Wei's life better, but in the end, it was this moment, this realization, that had brought them back together. The next few days were a blur. Wei remained in critical condition, but with each passing hour, there was a glimmer of hope. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, and as the days went on, Wei's condition improved. He woke up several times, his eyes filled with remorse and gratitude, always seeking Shen's forgiveness, always searching for a way to make up for the years they had lost. When Wei was finally well enough to leave the hospital, he did something that shocked Shen. He asked to move back into the house. It wasn't just about physical space. It was about rebuilding the emotional distance that had grown between them. Wei had realized the value of family, of the sacrifices Shen had made for him, and now he wanted to make things right. Shen wasn't sure what the future held. He didn't know if they could ever fully heal from the scars of the past. But as Wei walked through the door of their home once again, there was a sense of peace that Shen hadn't felt in years. They still had time. Time to rebuild, time to heal, and that, in itself, was enough. The story of Shen and Wei was not a fairy tale with a perfect ending. It was messy, raw, and full of heartache. But it was also a story of redemption, of second chances, and of the unbreakable bond between a father and his son. Sometimes it takes losing everything to realize what you truly had all along. And as Shen sat beside his son, watching the sun rise over the horizon, he knew that despite all the pain, they had both found something far more valuable: the chance to start over, together,